David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel is now hinting in a recent series of comments that she made that the United States is increasingly just not an ally of Europe, but instead more of an adversary like China and Russia, which has to be dealt with by Europe as an adversary rather than as an ally. And I know the Trumpists and the nationalists and the isolationists and the reactionaries will say, David, Europe, who cares what Europe thinks? We're the best. We'll go it alone. We don't need anybody. But this is actually serious. This is part of a geopolitical realignment that is not good for the United States. It's happening as a result of President Donald Trump. And I'm going to explain why this is such a concern. Okay, so first of all, Angela Merkel. I'm to Angela Merkel's left, much to her left. But she's a skilled politician. She's a powerful leader. She's respected by many of our historical allies around the world. And when Donald Trump was elected, we actually did a segment asking who will become the leader of the free world with the United States laughably under Donald Trump. It was November 14th when we did that story. And my argument at the time was that it would be Angela Merkel. The leader of the free world is, of course, not a literal term. It's a term that is a colloquial term. It dates back to the Cold War, and usually it applies to the president of the United States or the U.S. itself as sort of the paramount democratic superpower. And Donald Trump, as an embarrassment and as a destroyer of geopolitical alliances, is no longer that leader. And that leader realistically is now Angela Merkel. Now, last week, I told you that the superpower triad of Russia, China, and the United States is shifting in a way that is not good for the United States. If you're an economic nationalist, if you're a geopolitical nationalist and you want what's good for the United States, you see deteriorating U.S.-China relations with this constantly escalating trade war, while at the same time you see a growing cooperation or allegiance or alliance, rather, between China and Russia. And that is a relationship that is leaving the United States behind. We talked about that last week. We now also have Europe, according to Merkel, seeing the United States more as part of those adversaries like China and Russia, rather than as inherent and stable allies of the European Union and of Germany. And this means that we're on the outs with basically everybody at the same time, and that's not good for us. Let's look at what Angela Merkel said. Quote, "There is no doubt that Europe needs to reposition itself in a changed world. The old certainties of the post-war order no longer apply. They, meaning China, Russia, and the U.S., are forcing us time and again to find common positions. That is often difficult given our different interests, but we do get this done. Think, for example, of our policy regarding the conflict in Ukraine. Our policies on Africa, too, now follow a common strategy, which a few years ago would have been unthinkable. So we keep putting one foot in front of the other. However, our political power is not yet commensurate with our economic strength. And the implication here is clear. European leaders, more and more, are not seeing the Trump United States primarily as an ally of Europe. And why would they? And by the way, remember, when we had a president, when as I watched Angela Merkel give this speech and read the transcript, I was reminded of when we also had a president who could speak in a more sophisticated way, not like a fourth grader. Things have certainly changed a lot. Every time I see other world leaders speak, I'm reminded of that. But in terms of the substance, Merkel is right to feel the way that she does. Trump ignorantly and irrationally criticizes our historical European allies. Trump slams NATO. Trump threatens tariffs on the EU and European nations and sets up another trade war similar to the one with China that we can't win and that is hugely destructive. Trump backs out of the Paris Climate Agreement and is a complete non-factor in the world fight against climate change, in which Europe is a big player. The United Kingdom is increasingly at odds with the United States and with Trump, including over Iran, by the way, which I'll talk about next. The world is increasingly getting away from the US dollar as a reserve currency. Trump is considering potentially disastrous military action in multiple places, including Iran. This is textbook Russia geopolitics. If you look at Russian geopolitical strategy that they've been crafting for 20 plus years, everything is going exactly the way they want. Now, I'm not saying, I want to be clear, I'm not saying Putin is orchestrating all of this. I'm pointing out that this is out of the literal textbook, Foundations of Geopolitics, for what Russia wants and benefits from. You've got an ignorant moron president in the United States, okay, to put it very simply. You have the three major superpowers, US, Russia, China, increasingly positioned in a way that is not good for the United States, but very good for Russia, right? The US in a massive trade war with China to our detriment, while Russia slips in, makes nice with China, and sort of puts us on the outs of that very powerful geopolitical triangle. And meanwhile, Trump slams NATO, which is exactly what Russia and Vladimir Putin want, and also self-harms our alliances with Europe, which is exactly what Russia and Vladimir Putin want. So we end up with nothing and with no one. And Putin has hit the mango jackpot here in Donald Trump, for lack of a better term. And the United States is both engaging in geopolitical and economic policy that is damaging internally, and at the same time being seen as the bad guy, being seen as the obstinate one that you can't really deal with by more and more of the world. This is very, very bad for the United States, and it is one of the many reasons why this president needs to be removed from power as quickly as possible. At this point, I believe, as I've been saying for a while, that the quickest path to that is, I don't even have to say it. We all know what it is, and it's about 16, 17 months away at this point in time. We've got to do that. Yesterday, I told you about the push towards war with Iran that's being orchestrated by the Trump administration. And of course, it's being done with the very eager assistance of the very war-hungry National Security Advisor, John Bolton, who's actually been trying to go with Iran since he was in the George W. Bush administration. Unfortunately, however, British intelligence is now directly undermining Donald Trump's narrative, pointing out that there simply is no increasing threat from Iran, and that, in fact, the majority of the aggression currently in the U.S.-Iran face-off is coming from the American side, from the Trump administration, not from Iran. And sadly, I've got to do my necessary disclaimers. I am not pro-Iran in the sense that I do believe that Iran is in many ways a bad faith actor. I don't want Iran to have nuclear weapons. I do believe that the world is less safe if Iran has nuclear weapons. But I also exist in the real world, and I'm not going to make things up. And Iran is not the one making misstep after misstep in the last year. Remember that Barack Obama signed the Iran nuclear deal, and Iran stuck to that deal. And in comes Donald Trump and says, we're voiding the deal, period. Trump then goes even further and says, I think we're going to do some more sanctions on Iran. So Iran has reacted to this unprovoked aggression by the United States by saying, okay, if you're voiding our deal and you're sanctioning us, then we'll resume some nuclear development. I mean, why not? And immediately the Trump administration has started to use that to push for war. Trump has been presented with a plan to send 120,000 troops to the region. By the way, does he need congressional approval for that? Because when it was Obama deciding about military mobilization, Trump regularly tweeted that the president needs to get congressional approval for that. That's a question which we may have to explore in more detail very soon. Trump foments the aggressive rhetoric, and it is starting to smell like Iraq. It's starting to look and sound like the lead up to the Iraq war. But then in comes British intelligence yesterday, our ally, and says there's no increased threat from Iran in Syria. There's no increased threat from Iran in Iraq, which directly contradicts what the Trump administration has been touting and repeating. And this is coming from the top British general in the United States-led coalition against ISIS. And this is key because this is the claim that's made by the Trump administration to start setting up an increased military presence in the region, that Iranian-backed forces are more and more of a threat in the region. And immediately after this top British British military officer made the statement, U.S. Central Command says, no, British intelligence is just wrong, once again putting Trump's opinion in direct conflict with the intelligence of our allies and sometimes of our own intelligence agencies, quite frankly. Here's a quote from Major General Christopher Geika, who said, "No, there has been no increased threat from Iranian-backed forces in Iraq and Syria. We're aware of that presence clearly, and we monitor them along with a whole range of others because that's the environment we're in. We are monitoring the Shia militia groups. I think you're referring to carefully, and if the threat level seems to go up, then we'll raise our force protection measures accordingly." Trump immediately dismissing this as fake news. Lovely, right? And immediately this is starting to take shape, and it's looking a lot like that pre-Iraq war period during the George W. Bush administration. The difference being that hopefully this time there will be more prominent elected officials who will be loudly against it. Bernie Sanders, for example, already tweeting, quote, "The United States Congress must do everything it can to prevent the Trump administration's attempts to put us on the brink of a catastrophic and unconstitutional war with Iran." Senator Elizabeth Warren also tweeting, quote, "We cannot let the Trump administration drag us into yet another war in the Middle East. This is exactly why the president doesn't have the constitutional authority to declare war. That's Congress's job, and that's why I'm supporting this legislation to prevent a war with Iran." Understand, Trump is trying to start a war, and one of our biggest allies, Britain, is not on our side on the basis for that war and is in total disagreement about who the aggressor is. Okay, our ally, the UK, says we are the bad actor here. We are the aggressor. And sadly, we are. Now, there is one upside here. As bad of a player as the Iranian regime has been, there are more and more reports that they actually see through the bluster from Trump and recognize this as goading from Trump and a deliberate provocation. And hopefully they're smart enough not to take the bait. I do not support the Iranian regime, even 1%. But we can't allow another dumb Middle East war to get going. And hopefully, as a combination of American elected officials who are seeing this clearly, and maybe Iran recognizing this for the deliberate provocation that it is, we might be able to keep the United States out of another one of these endless and pointless military engagements in the Middle East. Let me know what you think. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Okay, let me say thank you to two really great people today. First and foremost is today's newest member of the day. I hope I'm pronouncing this name correctly. Gael Koichu. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Gael, thank you so much for your support. Also want to say thanks to Nathan Watkins, who's today's longtime sustaining member of the day. Nathan's been with the show as a member for almost 5 years, which is very much appreciated. That's a lot of monthly or yearly renewals. I don't know if Nathan has a monthly or yearly membership, but you can have either at a 40% discount if you use the coupon code THISIS2020, all lowercase, all one word, when you sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. Okay, big news. This is the point in the week and in the show where I mention some interesting discussions from the David Pakman Show subreddit, which you can find at davidpakman.com/REDDIT. The first thing I want to mention from the subreddit is that the subreddit itself has achieved more than 10,000 subscribers. And in fact, it's 10,098 as of this exact moment when I am mentioning it. Yes, the subreddit has 10,000 subscribers, one of the biggest subreddits of independent progressive shows. And there's really great discussion there. There's a lot of topics suggested for the show on the subreddit. We have now a full slate of moderators who ensure that there is respectful debate and we limit trolling and all of that stuff. So more than 10,000 of you are participating. Please keep signing up. It's free and it's a really great place to engage with other viewers of the show and with the show staff, etc., etc. davidpakman.com/Reddit. Also, there's a very interesting post on the subreddit. We mentioned, I believe it was last week or the week before on audience questions, I was asked, David, why is your show disproportionately male in terms of its audience? And I explained it's not just our show, it's all online news and politics shows are this is something that we contend with. We have disproportionately male audiences. And a post was made exploring ideas for attracting more women viewers to the show. And they range from the wacky, like doing the show with no shirt on, or possibly popping my collar or speaking Spanish. Or there are also other sort of more reasonable ideas that were suggested, including topic choice and other things. And yeah, I mean, I think that this is actually, it would be an interesting nut to crack, because both from the point of view of, I would love to have more women in the audience, simply because I think that would, in terms of the feedback that we get, provide more balanced feedback. Since the audience is disproportionately male, the feedback that I get about the show comes disproportionately from a male audience, even though half the country is women. So that would be interesting, first and foremost. And then secondly, from an advertising perspective, we deal with a lot of advertisers who don't want to advertise because they say, well, your audience, we target women, or we at least need something closer to a 50-50 audience based on our demographic research and our focus groups. Your mostly male audience is not a good fit. So I think financially it would also be great for the show to attract more women. So for all reasons, that's something that I think we should strive to do. And you can comment on this by joining the subreddit at davidpakman.com/Reddit. Now, let me also mention, I have something to give away. I have a really great card game to give away, okay? This is a new sponsor that is doing some ads on our show. The game is called Impeach the Card Slap Game. It's a really fun game. It's great for parties. I've played it with some friends. It's a combination of really great humor about the Trump administration and really great cartoon artwork. And it's also just a fun, well-designed game. And I have 5 of these to give away, okay? I have 5. I will send these to you, one of them, not all 5, to the first 5 people who email me, david@davidpakman.com, or use the contact form on our website, okay? If you don't email me in time, it'll just be the first come, first serve. We will send them anywhere in the world. Email me, say, I want one of the Impeach card games. Include your address. Include all the information I need, so that way we don't have to email back and get engaged in this sort of endless loop of emails, okay? But I've got 5 of those to give away. And if you don't get one of the 5, you can go to davidpakman.com/impeach and use the coupon code Pakman to get 10% off the card game. And they've got a bunch of other funny Trump satirical t-shirts and other stuff. davidpakman.com/impeach to get 10% off with the coupon code Pakman. But I've got 5 free Impeach card games, great for parties, especially if you've got conservative friends coming over. Nice little game to pull out instead of playing, any one of those other games, which I won't name because they haven't advertised on the show. Okay, we've been covering the state-level proposals to make abortions almost or completely illegal. Yesterday, we talked about Alabama, no abortions other than exceptions for the health of the mother. On the program tomorrow, I'm going to talk about Missouri. And I've already explained the sort of underlying idea here, which is that you've got a right-wing Supreme Court now, thanks to Donald Trump, more right-wing than any court we've had in a long time. So the strategy is get some crazy bill passed at the state level. It will be immediately appealed and challenged. And more than likely, because it's so whacked out and in many ways would conflict with Roe v. Wade, it is likely to be struck down by a lower court, appeal it all the way up to the Supreme Court, and then hopefully get a decision from this very conservative Supreme Court that will allow a national pushback on abortion regulations everywhere. There's a really good piece in Vox that explains that this is not just like a pipe dream for the religious right, that this is Roe v. Wade in spirit and in name is in danger because of this, what I called yesterday, a very clever strategy by the religious right. But what I want to talk about today is that even if Roe v. Wade stands, legally speaking, if it stays enacted in force, the spirit of Roe v. Wade is in danger either way. Because you can undo the effect of Roe versus Wade without actually undoing Roe versus Wade in and of itself. And that is sort of the premise of these really extreme anti-abortion bills that have passed in 2019, 4, 5, 6, depending on how you're counting. And at some point, something is very likely to get to the Supreme Court, okay? that won't by definition get Roe v. Wade overturned. And there are more and more analysts that are pointing out astutely that overturning Roe v. Wade may not even actually be the goal of these anti-choice activists. And it might not even be the best thing for the anti-choice movement. The idea being, if Roe v. Wade stays as the law, that emboldens and empowers the activism of the anti-choice movement to say Roe v. Wade is still there, but we're working at the state level to stop all abortion. They can keep raising money around the issue. And you can do a lot of damage to abortion rights without actually overturning Roe v. Wade itself. Roe v. Wade in 73, at the federal level said abortion is legal up to 22 to 24 weeks in most cases. And so the problem that a lot of states run up against when they try to pass more restrictive laws than that is that they conflict with federal supremacy and Roe v. Wade. So that's why lower courts will typically strike them down. And the Supreme Court is rarely going to hear them because it's pretty clear that they conflict with Roe v. Wade. The idea here is you've got a particularly conservative Supreme Court. If you can word one of these bills in a way that maybe some element of it, or along some very narrow legal interpretation, the law would be okay at the state level, or a part of the law would be okay at the state level, you could get a ruling from this very conservative Supreme Court that will, without overturning Roe v. Wade in and of itself, create a framework or a sort of guide to how at the state level you can pass something that would be more restrictive than Roe v. Wade. The other practical matter that would point to this being a better strategy than just trying to get Roe v. Wade overturned is that even the anti-abortion Supreme Court justices may not want to attach their names to overturning Roe v. Wade. So whether Roe v. Wade stays or goes in name, the idea here is that the principles of Roe versus Wade can be dismantled by these endless little cuts that could come as soon as one of these state abortion bans gets to the Supreme Court and gets a favorable ruling, even in some sense. And then they can make states be allowed to have much more leeway in deciding what to do about abortion. And maybe the most important thing to remind you about is that with lots of, similarly to lots of other political issues that are great for angering people and for raising money and for making noise, but not necessarily representative of the national opinion, most of the American people are not on the anti-abortion side. And we have sort of two important data points on this. Number one, for the first time ever a few years ago, support for abortion in what's called most cases. So obviously there are particular cases where you do get a majority of the country saying I'm against abortions in that particular situation. In most cases, more than half the country supports abortion. And that is a number that was only first achieved a couple of years ago. So support for abortion has been rising. But even if you look at the individual state level, there is not a single state where a total abortion ban has even 25% support. We're putting on the screen a data analysis by Data for Progress from Cooperative Congressional Election Studies data. So understand that states are passing almost total abortion bans, even though the people in not a single state support that at even a rate of 25%. The problem is that abortion is a really strong single issue topic. So guns, we've talked about guns. People have very partisan and extreme, and by extreme, I don't mean extreme on the political spectrum, but very ingrained views about guns. But it doesn't seem like guns are nearly as much of a voting issue as other issues. Abortion is a really big voting issue. Donald Trump has lived a life completely antithetical to evangelical Christianity's stated principles, stated being a key word. But in the end, evangelicals voted for Trump. Why? Because Trump now claims to be against abortion and Hillary Clinton is pro-choice. And that actually is a big voting motivator for people in lots of parts of the country. So Roe v. Wade is in serious danger, even if the law in and of itself remains in force. I told you exactly the way that it would happen 2 years ago. It is happening. And if there's any wake-up call here, it's we cannot let Donald Trump get a third Supreme Court pick. We know how to prevent that from happening, at least potentially, depending on what happens in the next year and a half. We've got to vote him out in November of 2020. Make sure you're following the show on Instagram at David Pakman Show. Follow me on Instagram at david.pakman. I will be photo blogging my upcoming trip, which I think many of you will find very interesting. We'll take a quick break and be back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome to the program today Nancy Rosenblum, who is a Harvard University Department of Government Professor Emerita, who wrote the book A Lot of People Are Saying, co-written with Russell Muirhead. Nancy, so great to have you on the program.
I'm delighted to be with you, David.
So I think an interesting place to start would be, we talk a lot about conspiracy theories, conspiratorial thinking on the program. We've looked at some of the psychological mechanisms that impact people getting into this type of thinking. But one thing we've not discussed so much is whether, from a sort of objective empirical point of view, conspiratorial type thinking is increasing in society. So let's maybe start there. Do we have any strong evidence one way or the other about whether in general this type of thought is more prevalent today than it has been in the past?
I don't think we have more evidence of its prevalence. I think we can say two things with some confidence. One is that the spread of conspiracy thinking probably has increased because of the internet. It's costless and speedy to spread these kinds of rumors or claims. And that gives us a reason. It's hard to count on the internet, as you probably know, but it gives us reason to think that more people are at least exposed to these things, whether or not they're true believers. I think the other thing I can say with confidence, because it's the theme of my book, is that there is a new kind of conspiracy thinking out there today. And it's not conspiracy theory as we understand it. It's conspiracism without the theory. The two have become decoupled. And this really is a new and malignant phenomenon in politics. It's brought conspiracy thinking in from the fringe right into the White House and the halls of power. And it has, I think, a different significance and different effect than classic conspiracy theory.
Well, so can we first define the difference? What would be, and maybe examples would be good, when we talk about conspiracy theorizing versus conspiracism, what is the distinction between the two?
Well, a conspiracy theory is a theory. We should take that part of the phrase seriously. That is, it's offering an explanation of things. And conspiracy theorists do a lot of rigorous work. They collect the dots, they amass evidence, they find patterns in this evidence, they develop a grand narrative. And sometimes these conspiracy theories are actually true, and sometimes they're completely fantastic and unwarranted. And often they're a vexing mix of the two. But in any case, these people are like researchers. They are making an argument based on evidence, and they want you to think that this argument is true, that the unintelligible, the previously unintelligible has been made intelligible by their findings, and that the unbelievable has been made believable. So, for example, a conspiracy theorist has an account of the real assassination of John F. Kennedy.
Right.
Or a conspiracy theory about the real sources of the 9/11 attack, that it wasn't 19 men operating out of the remote quarters of Afghanistan. It was the U.S. government or drones or whatever it was. So that's a conspiracy theory. It's an explanation. And in a way, conspiracy theorists reason the same way we all reason when we want to make an argument about something that's happening in the world. The new conspiracism really is entirely different. It's conspiracy without theory, and it doesn't attempt to explain anything. There are no dots, there are no patterns, there's no evidence, there's no argument. Instead, what you have is a bare assertion. The election is rigged, for example, or the Mueller report is an attempt at a coup d'etat. So it's bare assertion. Sometimes it takes the form of, I'm just asking questions. You know, what I know is bad enough, people would say about the birther conspiracy. What I know is bad enough, but I'm just asking questions. What I really want is to know a lot more. or it takes the form of a kind of attribution, like some agent of government is plotting something. It's an insidious plot. It's clearly ominous. It's something worse than sort of partisan bias or self-interest, but there's no explanation of who or why or for what purpose. So it's conspiracism without the explanation. And there's a way in which this conspiracism without the explanation is very powerful.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask, is one more pernicious than the other or dangerous than the other? Because you might imagine that with a particular conspiracy theory, you can at least attempt to take the theory head on, present a contradictory narrative, ask for that evidence, ask what might change your mind about this particular theory. It seems that with conspiracism more generally, it could be more difficult to disabuse someone of those beliefs.
I think that that's exactly right. That I made the point earlier, the conspiracy theory reasons the way we reason. These kinds of bare assertions, like the election is rigged, are completely disorienting. They're disorienting and unnerving because they completely change what it means for us to know something. Because they come without argument, they come just with insistence. And when we can't, and so it changes, as I say, what it means to know something, and it's very hard to answer it. The other thing that makes it much more dangerous, of course, is that it's coming from the office of the president or from elected representatives or from governors and so on, and of course from conspiracy entrepreneurs who spread it. And there's a third thing that makes it, I think, more potent than conspiracy theory, and that's that it uses the internet in a different way. Conspiracy theorists use the internet to find their dots and their evidence, right? Architects and engineers for 9/11 truth look up the escalating temperature of jet fuels, for example, or the capacities of drones. Whereas the new conspiracists use the internet really very differently to spread their ideas. And when you make a bare assertion, it's easy to spread, right? You can do it in 280 characters easily. You're not offering an explanation. And they use assent to this theory as validation. What validates it is not the argument. What validates it is a lot of people are saying, and that's the title of the book. So, and you can, in a sense, count the number of retweets or likes or shares. And so you can say a lot of people are saying that the Obama administration tapped the phones of Trump Tower during the campaign.
Yeah, my sense when I talk to conspiracy theorists is that they do care and are genuinely invested in the truth or falsity of what their assertions are.
Exactly.
How does that compare to conspiracism? Because with some of these conspiracist ideas, I am less convinced that those espousing the ideas are actually invested in the truth, but rather are invested merely in the spread of the general notion for their benefit.
I think that that's very perceptive of you, David. And here's how I understand it. When the president, for example, makes a conspiracist claim that the Justice Department is planning a coup, the people who follow him, who assent to it, who spread it, who repeat it, don't necessarily think that all of the elements or all of the facts have to be true. They think that they are, and the phrase that we use is that this claim is true enough. That is, it fits with their political hostilities and political animosities and political connections so that the story is true enough. If you think that Hillary Clinton is evil and does horrible things and lies about it, then the Pizzagate conspiracy, which says that she's running a child sex trafficking ring out of the basement of a pizza parlor in Northwest Washington, D.C., they don't necessarily have to believe that all of those facts are true. What they believe is it's true enough. And let me read you, because this confirms your hypothesis here. Let me read you a couple of quotes about what true enough really sounds like. So a Republican representative in Congress was asked about the allegation that the Democratic Party had actually conspired to create that clash between white nationalists and protesters in Charlottesville in 1917. And the representative said, I'm not saying it's true, but I'm saying it's completely plausible. I'll give you another example. When Sarah Huckabee Sanders was asked about Trump's tweet of a video that falsely purported to show a Muslim immigrant assaulting someone, she said, whether it's a real video, the threat is real. And this is the point, that it's true enough. So probably there are some believers who think every element of something like Pizzagate is true. And in fact, an armed gunman went to the pizza parlor and shot up the place because he went to rescue the children. But most, I think, do not. I think that this new conspiracism and the assent to it and the validation through tweeting and liking and affirming and so on is a sort of form of political participation.
Yeah, well, I was going to say that there's this rationalization that often exists, which is it's less important whether this is specifically true because belief in this serves is sort of a means to an end, even if this particular assertion is not true. And I think that that's how a lot of conspiracists rationalize continuing to spread stuff that even they question the truth of.
I think that's right. And so then the question becomes, why is this so dangerous? What's happening? I mean, we could look back and say it's absurd. We could say it's a new and sort of malignant form of political expression, but we haven't gotten at why it's really dangerous, why we should care about it, and why I think it's one of the most prominent and underassessed elements of American politics today, the spread of conspiracism. And I think that what it does, besides disorienting us, is to delegitimate foundational democratic institutions. And the most obvious is all kinds of knowledge-producing institutions have been delegitimized by these conspiracist claims. The most obvious and publicized is fake news. Fake news doesn't just say that they're erroneous or making up partisan stories. Fake news really says that there's a conspiracy in the mainstream media to denigrate the administration, and that the newscasters are enemies of the people. But that's just the most obvious. Every time when Trump says, for example, that he had the biggest inaugural crowd in history, and then the National Park Service photograph showed that it was a modest crowd, what did he do? He said that the National Park Service doctored the photographs. This is a conspiracist claim, and it undermines the meaning and the value and the authority of the National Park Service. And the same thing is true when he attacks the FBI or national intelligence estimates. When the National Intelligence Director, Dan Coates, issued his annual threat assessment and said that climate change had become a security threat for a variety of reasons, the administration said he should go back to school. What does the National Intelligence Director know? So we have this cumulative delegitimation of all kinds of knowledge-producing institutions. And we need them because you cannot make political decisions and policy decisions without some confidence that facts matter. And conspiracism is a better, more permanent, more powerful, I think, way of delegitimating these institutions and the facts that they assess than lies. Trump's lies come and go, for example. They're fact-checked or they're not, but they're hard to keep up with. I think the New York Times said something like 10,000 recently.
Yeah.
But his conspiracist claims, and the ones that are supported by his followers and by many Republicans today, they're pretty permanent. The same ones go on and on. They have traction. He comes back to them again and again. And they do this delegitimation.
Nancy, in the limited time we have left, I'd love to just briefly hear, what are the techniques, if there are any, that you have found to be effective in getting people away from conspiracist beliefs and a sort of conspiracist framework?
Well, to some extent, it's the same as combating lies. I mean, there's a kind of fact-checking that can go on. I would insist that you will never get at the people who are supporting Trump and other conspiracist claims for political reasons.
Right.
This is a kind of entrenched polarization. So the question is, can you immunize or give some confidence to the rest of the public who really gets sort of disoriented by these wacky claims and who I think turn off politically? And it's really just, I think, a matter of giving people confidence in their common sense. Because that's what these conspiracist claims do. They delegitimate institutions, they delegitimate political parties and political opposition, but they do it in a way that offends common sense. That's why we're so disoriented by it all. And I think some confidence in common sense that comes about by speaking truth to conspiracism is the best thing we can do.
We've been speaking with Nancy Rosenblum, Harvard University Department of Government Professor Emerita, who wrote the book A Lot of People Are Saying, co-written, of course, with Russell Muirhead. Nancy, such a pleasure having you on. I appreciate it.
And you were a great questioner, David. Thank you.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So there's some pretty bad news for Bernie Sanders in a recent poll, which says that Bernie's support among young voters has dropped significantly. Now, I hate that I have to do this sometimes multiple times in one show, but as a reminder, I am just the messenger here, okay? I didn't do this poll. I'm not anti-Bernie. I like Bernie. He's one of my top candidates for 2020. I voted for him in the 2016 primary. I'm telling you the news, which is what this poll is asserting. I am not the person that you should attack simply for telling you that this is a poll that has been released. Now, these numbers are from a new Morning Consult poll. Bernie has been super strong in the 18 to 29 age bracket. And in the same poll, Morning Consult, back in February, Bernie had support from 46% of those aged 18 to 29. In March, almost the same. He still had 45% of 18 to 29-year-olds supporting him. This number has now dropped to 33% in May. That's a reduction of more than 25% in the support from young people. So the obvious question is, who is that 18 to 29-year-old cohort moving towards in the 2020 Democratic primary? And the answer is maybe surprising to some in our audience, because a bunch of that support has moved over to Joe Biden. And I know many in our audience will say and have been saying, David, only old people are supporting Joe Biden. And it's true that Joe Biden has disproportionate support from older voters. But according to this poll, Joe Biden has gone from under 20% support from 18 to 29-year-olds up to 24% in the latest survey. Elizabeth Warren has also increased her support. She's gone from around 5% support from 18 to 29-year-olds in March up to more like 10% now. And that's the majority, or a significant portion rather, of the support that Bernie has lost from that age group. So let's go through it. First of all, are there any glaring methodology issues which would suggest that the poll results are just completely wrong? Nothing obvious that I was able to find when I looked at it. The next question is, will it matter if there's been a shift in 18 to 29-year-old support from Bernie to Warren and from Bernie to Biden if 18 to 29-year-olds don't show up to vote? And what I mean by that is that historically, older voters are much more reliable voters, whereas young voters are less likely to vote once Election Day actually arrives. And once we think about that, we have to ask, why is it that some of the 18 to 29-year-olds who were supporting Bernie Sanders a month ago, 2 months ago, why have they moved on to someone else? And why would it be Biden? And why would it be Elizabeth Warren? When it comes to Biden, it's not likely to be over Biden's politics specifically. I mean, Biden is very moderate. He is very much in the line of Hillary Clinton, not drastically different from, you know, a 1970s moderate Republican in many ways. But I think it's undeniable that Biden's perceived association with the Obama presidency, around which people on the older end of 18 to 29 may remember positively and have some nostalgia for, particularly when you look at who's in the White House right now. When it comes to some of that Bernie 18 to 29-year-old support shifting to Elizabeth Warren, there is a contingent that liked Elizabeth Warren in 2016, but ended up with Bernie as sort of the closest person to Warren that they actually had a chance to vote for during the 2016 primary. They may simply be reinvigorated by the fact that Elizabeth Warren's campaign is getting more attention in the last 4 to 6 weeks. It's been picking up some polling steam. And my message, if you want Bernie to win, is very simple. Don't react to this story by don't react by attacking me, because that will do nothing to help Bernie Sanders win. Don't react by attacking Joe Biden or whoever. Go and volunteer for Bernie's campaign and make the case to people who are already on the left that you believe Bernie is their best option from those that are available. Remember that a spirited primary, a healthy disagreement within the primary, it's not a bad thing, even if Bernie Sanders is losing support, because my guess is that in the end, most Warren supporters, if Bernie's the nominee, are going to vote for Bernie. Okay. Most Bernie supporters, if Warren is the nominee, are going to vote for Elizabeth Warren. Whether they all would vote for Joe Biden if Biden's the nominee, I'm a little bit more concerned about. But the point is, it's okay for the progressive contingent to be sort of divided at this point in time. We've seen, as I predicted would happen, as soon as Joe Biden announced his candidacy, the establishment support has coalesced around him. So Beto has been dropping. Cory Booker has been dropping. And that establishment centrist wing has been seriously just joining Joe Biden effectively. And that's why his poll numbers are doing well. The progressive vote is still very much more split between candidates. And it doesn't really necessarily tell us what it is that's going to happen once the Democratic primary is settled. I think most of those voters who now are split are going to come over to the Democratic nominee almost no matter who it is. I will put it that way. And maybe we'll dig into what I mean by that on an upcoming show. This is absolutely hilarious. Remember that obvious scam that was a GoFundMe campaign claiming to be raising money to build Donald Trump's wall on the U.S.-Mexico border, and $20 million were actually donated? This is the wall, by the way, that was definitely going to be paid for by Mexico, that we've not heard a word about from Donald Trump for about 3 months now. Back in December, a guy named Brian Kolfage started a GoFundMe campaign saying the government won't do it. If Trump won't do it, if Democrats will get in the way, we can do it ourselves. Let's raise the money. We're going to try to raise $1 billion, which, of course, even if they did, would have only paid for like a tiny sliver of wall. Kolfage said that every penny would be refunded if they didn't get the $1 billion. Well, they didn't get the $1 billion. They raised $20 million of people's money, which is insane. And he claims he's not giving the money back because he is going to start building parts of the wall on private land. And that's why he's not refunding people's money. And supposedly they were going to break ground in April. We're now in May. Nothing has actually been done. The updates to the GoFundMe page have slowed down to being almost non-existent. And now, like only now, these absolutely imbecilic Trump supporters and wall builders are starting to suggest that maybe they were scammed and they threw their money away at something absolutely and totally ridiculous. And of course, there are some donors who are starting to say authorities should really step in and take care of this. They should help us get our money back from this scam, which doesn't really sound like small government to me. And I'm not one of these ultra libertarian buyer beware types. I do believe in government regulation. I do believe in government oversight and all of that. You know that if you've been watching this show for a while. But GoFundMe has disclaimers about how the donor must research what they're donating to. Why exactly should the government step in here and refund people's money? But there's an even bigger truth here, which is undeniable, which is that if you voted for Donald Trump, you got scammed, right? I mean, the entire campaign was a scam by a professional scammer. Trump University, Trump's stakes, Trump's real estate deals, Trump's campaign, Trump's presidency. It's all been a scam. If you got bamboozled into voting for Trump, it's not really that surprising that you fell for this obvious and stupid GoFundMe scam to build the wall. The universe of Trump is riddled with. It's almost exclusively bogus, empty promises. So Trumpists were really the perfect mark for Brian Kolfage to raise $20 million off of them, supposedly to build the wall. I will make an offer today to every single person who donated to this wall and thinks it might be a scam. Send me $100 and I'll investigate for you whether you got scammed, and I'll get you a report about that very, very soon. Give me a break, guys, okay? If you couldn't tell that this was an obvious scam from the beginning, I don't think that you deserve any of the money back, and certainly it should not be the government bailing you out, although I would be totally fine with a civil suit against Brian Kolfage if that's the way you want to approach it. Let me know what you think. Should the government step in here? I think the answer is no. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2DavidP. Here's an idea from a viewer sort of suggesting a trade between abortion law and gun safety law. Take a listen.
Hello, David. My name is Robert. I'm looking for to leave a message. I wanted to know how you felt about possibly doing a national compromise regarding pro-life and the Second Amendment, perhaps putting limits on abortion in exchange for limits on guns. I know the current situation shows that, maybe the right is moving more for just getting rid of the abortion, but would it be worthwhile to pursue a compromise on that? So it's limits on abortion in exchange for limits on guns. Thank you.
I don't think so. So listen, I've been calling out this issue for 10 years that exists when our members of Congress make laws where they put together a bill that is about funding health insurance. And then other members of Congress come in and they say, okay, I'll support it if in the bill for funding health insurance, you also sponsor some pet project here that has nothing to do with health insurance, or some pet project there, or this pork or that. I'm against it. I think this is one of the most sort of destructive elements of how we do lawmaking in the United States, and particularly when you're talking about such major issues. I mean, a woman's right to get a medical procedure that she and her doctor determine is the right one is a really important thing in a country that claims to be about liberty and freedom and self-determination. Keeping people safe with reasonable gun safety regulations is an extraordinarily important thing, given that we have hundreds of millions of guns, if I recall correctly, that's the right number, of guns in the United States. So I would be very hesitant, even though I am sometimes pragmatic to a fault, I would be very hesitant to take that approach and say, we would give up some abortion restrictions that we find to be completely immoral if they would give us some gun safety regulations. I think we got to keep these things separate and actually negotiate them and fight them on the merits individually and not get lulled into the game that is part of the problem. This is the game we're trying to change. And I get the appeal of saying, well, we're trying to change the game. Maybe here's an example of how we can use the game to our advantage. I get it. But these issues are too important to do that. And I would be against it. On the bonus show today, we will talk about New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio announcing his presidential campaign. We will talk about the United States birth rate in a record slump, a 32-year low last year. And we'll talk about what the impact will be bigger picture. It might not be all bad. We'll also tell you about how one of the Republican bathroom bill authors from these trans bathroom bill fiascos has actually secured the Republican nomination in North Carolina's redo of that totally fraudulent fiasco that took place. All of those stories and more on today's bonus show. 2 ways to get access. Become a member at davidpakman.com/membership. Become a patron at patreon.com/davidpakmanshow. I'll speak to you then, hopefully anyway.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.